Hi there. Talk about transformational change, but I'm really going to teach y'all how to do puzzles because I think that's a better use of our time. I wanted to talk about puzzles because when I first stare at a puzzle, I have a moment, and sometimes it's a long moment, but I really stare at the pieces questioning how they're all going to come together. And I've done a lot of puzzles in my life, as I'm sure many of you have, and somehow that moment always happens. I stare at the pieces. That seems to be the challenge that's in front of me. I organize the pieces into their shapes and into their colors. That seems to be my process or my system. And then I look at the picture, and that's my desired outcome of what I'm trying to achieve. And I don't know about you, but I often pour myself a glass of wine, feel a little bit confident in taking it on. But as I approach the puzzle, no matter what, I seem to always run into challenges. And when those challenges happen, I question my abilities and I keep moving through. And at some point, there is a turning point in doing that puzzle when it all seems to be clear. All the pieces seem to fit together and make sense how it comes together. And maybe I've just been doing a lot of puzzles during COVID. That might just be my issue, but this concept of puzzles and the concept of that challenge and all the pieces and questioning our abilities really resonates with me as I think about each of the challenges that we're faced with right now and what we're trying to solve for. The health crisis and its resulting business disruption have created new challenges at a pace and really at a magnitude that has made, I think, most of us, most brands, most organizations question our system and even question our abilities. And I imagine that for each of us as humans, not only professionally has it made us question that, but also personally, just given all of the changes that are occurring. So we've discovered a new pace through all of this, that the planning and the process and the policies and everything that we have relied on through our past systems, essentially there is this new pace that has been discovered through all of this. And many organizations have accomplished what previously they may have thought impossible given the pace that we're working at. So we have heard many times that there really is no return to what was. And right now that is a guess, but that is what the signs are showing us, is that what was is probably not what we're going to return to. But what we are looking at is that there really is an opportunity for us to look at the good that has come out of these business disruptions, because there really is some good that has come out of this. We have seen so many examples of organizations working outside of the existing processes, the existing policies, and the systems that have been put in place. So just some examples. Many of us have been involved in innovation planning, innovation research, all of that in the years in our career. And innovation planning is a process that takes time and has many inputs. And then there you go from that to an operational roadmap. And then that's a whole process to get through. And then ultimately at the end of all of that, you have your innovation, your product your product or experience that you're putting out there. But that is not what we saw to be true through all of this. There are beverage companies, distilleries, brands that were never working on building hand sanitizer before. And then all of a sudden we're able to transition their factory lines in a matter of weeks from deodorant and alcohol to making hand sanitizer. The same is true for face masks and for ventilators. And that in any other world would have been a massive innovation planning process. The same is true about customer experience. Changing your customer service process, establishing a new customer experience, either through your digital or in-person experience, is a significant undertaking that then once you've done all of that, you move into the operationalizing of that, and ultimately then it's ready to go. And that is, again, not what we have seen to be true. There's payment automation that has come out of nowhere and really moved into a pretty decent customer experience. There's curbside that is now available in both retail and restaurant locations, and then of course delivery. And again, human resources planning. This is another huge undertaking that has followed a very specific process and policy for many years. And what we know to be true is moving to remote workforce, which would have been a massive decision and a major undertaking in previous worlds, just is not what seemed to be true through all of this. And the pace that these decisions and that the systems were put in place is something we absolutely can learn from. So ultimately, what we want to talk about is that we've not only discovered that new pace, but we've discovered new paths. And as we look across the brands and the organizations that have taken on these transformational changes, there seem to be some patterns in how they've addressed these challenges to create the change that's needed. And these are some of the patterns that we see to be true across these different businesses and brands that we've been looking at. So the technical limitations have been challenged. The infrastructure and the transition of factory lines, those limitations would have previously been barriers in moving forward, and those technical limitations were essentially challenged. There was no other option but to ignore the limitations and plow through those barriers. Policies have been challenged and in many times ignored. The policies are put in place for, I'm sure, many good reasons, but as we all know, policies can get in the way. And so policies have been challenged and ignored so that we can make many of these major movements that we've needed to make. Management dynamics have been challenged. So access to leadership, we have all seen in each of our companies, but we've also seen across huge organizations and brands that the access to leadership and the transparency that's being offered both externally and also to internal employees is pretty significant right now. Our weekly meetings and our project team meetings have changed. The dynamics of those meetings, yes, are about our projects, but also about what's going on in the world at large. It's just changing the dynamics of those relationships and the way we work together. Individual roles and responsibilities have been expanded. So yes, my job and my role is one very specific thing, but because of the changing workforce infrastructure and because of everything that was happening, those roles and responsibilities have expanded significantly, and we found new ways to work with each other. Mindsets have shifted to the collective impact in creating solutions. So again, collaboration and what we can achieve together through passion and trying to solve the same problem together have found new ways for us to create solutions together. And we're seeing that across these transformational change across organizations. And the final, and perhaps the most important in my mind, is that the scenario planning and the inputs that we use for scenario planning were somewhat wide open. And while that was both terrifying, there's also an exhilarating part of that they were wide open with no benchmarks to refer to. So that lent itself to a wide open landscape of not having to follow what always was, but the potential of what could be. So I am now going to hand off to Jennifer, and she is going to introduce our fantastic speaker for today's session.
Yeah, can you tell we're excited? Thanks for that, Christy. It was a perfect setup because, I mean, Marian, even here among your own CEO, kind of recognizing that, yep, we're in this spot. This is what has happened. And the way that our people work together is what's going to allow us to continue. I love the uplifting, optimistic, rolling with the waves, because the changes, they are happening for sure. Marian has been in this profession, this career for 20 years now. She's spent 13 years of those working on the agency side and the past 7 years with Microsoft. I've known Marian throughout much of the professional career. I can attest that she is just an amazing colleague, a tremendous leader. I couldn't think of a better person to be there to help an organization the size and scale of Microsoft to deal with change. Marian is the Director of Brand and Advertising Strategy Research at Microsoft, and she leads a team that deals with the Microsoft brand, the product portfolio, brand strategy, advertising, and demand generation. So, I mean, even when you come to work every morning, Marian, I feel like you're ready for transformational change. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, of course, Jennifer, thank you so much. And I have to say, it's such a joy to see so many familiar faces from over the course of time. It's really nice to be here, so thank you. And also a huge thanks to my team who's not here on the line except for Kayla, so thanks Kayla for being here. But I'm going to present kind of a journey that we've been on, and while I'm presenting, there is a team of people both at Microsoft and in our partners. A quick nod to Susan, who I saw was also on the line, who really have helped us with this. So let me just set up kind of the problem. As Jennifer mentioned, my team's responsible for understanding kind of what advertising we should be doing as Microsoft across our product portfolio, and how we measure the impact of that advertising in the product portfolio as part of, as a part of some of the larger kind of portfolio dynamics that we have. And so what I'm going to talk to you today about is brand advertising specifically. So Jen talked about demand gen and brand strategy, and in this case, I'm going to talk specifically about how, in a world that was turned on its head, we start to pull apart when we're trying to move perceptions in the real world, how you say, all right, this set of perceptions is attributed to or not attributed to the marketing we do, and the millions and millions of dollars and the lots of creative minds and the media that we put behind that. How do we attribute that to the effort we're making as Microsoft versus incredible market dynamic shifts that frankly I'd never seen before, and I think I'm in good company probably there. So really quick, this is old data actually. I'm giving you a snapshot in time back in May. Because what I want to introduce you to is kind of where we were. We had some Microsoft Teams advertising in market, which was great. It was the first time we had Teams advertising in market, and we started that advertising in January. Me and my team were going along our merry way with a really pretty sophisticated book of research that we use to measure the effectiveness or lack thereof of our advertising portfolio, including this particular campaign, which is a brand campaign around Teams. And then, of course, in March, everything flipped on its head. And in this case, I'm talking about iWorkers. So we're talking about people like us on this call who are working, and they're working, generally speaking, with technology and with computers, and they're using that to get their jobs done. And all of a sudden, everyone was working from home, and the communications category went from kind of 0 to 100 overnight. And so because of this massive shift home. And so that's great. In fact, it was super great for our business, for Teams specifically, but it presented a real challenge for us as marketers, because when we looked at our data, this is what we saw. We saw over the course of 8 weeks, 10 weeks, brand perception data moving at orders of magnitude that I had never seen over the course of a 20-year career. We saw things like brand momentum, not just for us and for our competitors in the category, moving from kind of sleepy to super dramatic. We had, in this case, I'm intentionally not giving you the metrics or the brands here, but we saw this 115% increase in this case, brand momentum. And so that's fantastic. Of course, we feel really good about that. And along the other side here, these are just other examples of other metrics we saw moving dramatically. And so while we all, as kind of people in the brands profession, feel really good about this, it also, as a researcher, makes you go, okay, how do we understand the impact of what we are doing with significant dollars in marketing versus what impact simply the market is having on these metrics? And so, in fact, in May, I sat with our CMO and he said, can you tell me, like, I see these metrics moving, but like, we're spending millions and millions of dollars. Like, are we actually having an impact? Is it worth being in market? Should we double down on this marketing, or basically is the market effectively doing the work for us? And this is the kind of question that me and my team answer every single day. But in this case, we did not have the data that we typically had because the whole world was on its head, and any pre-data, any time series was kind of no longer understandable in the same way we had understood it previously. And so let me just give you an example. And on the left here is kind of our best case scenario, but we're lucky enough to have extremely sophisticated tracking mechanisms and the machine learning models to tell us kind of what we think is happening in the market and what degree we think our marketing is actually contributing to usage or unit sales or whatever the end business metric is. And so on the left-hand side here, we do this a lot, and we see, in stable markets with long time series, we're able to say with precision we believe that our marketing is having this impact on sales. It has this end ROI. This is with brand marketing campaigns, not with performance marketing, which is a different kind of analysis altogether. But in an ideal world, this is what we're doing. In this case, with the Teams campaign, we not only had very limited time series on the category, on the campaign, we had very little baseline. We had a couple of points of baseline kind of prior to being in market with the campaign. We had a rapidly evolving category, which also meant a rapidly evolving user base. And this is really important because some of the ways we understand the effectiveness of campaigns is to look at people who are recognizing the campaign versus not, our super kind of research 101 way to do it. That's one way to do it. But when you're, when that group of recognizers is rapidly changing their usage of the product week over week over week, that recognizer versus non-recognizer view, which was already biased, by the way, before you put this into account, becomes so biased that it's hard to know what to make of it. Because now you have, you might see a trend going upwards over time, but really what you're seeing is potentially, just a changing user base. So we had a bunch of data sources, and we're really lucky and privileged to have a lot of data sources, but we could not use them as we once could. And we knew we had a lot of bias in our data, and we could understand some of it, and we couldn't understand all of it. So the team on whole, we came back from that meeting with Chris, our CMO, and we said, like, what do we got? Like, what do we have? Where do we know there's bias in the data? Where can we correct that bias? And where can we not correct that bias? And if it's biased, that's fine. I just need to understand it. So let's correct it where we can. Where we can't, that data still might tell us something. I just need to be clear. I can't quite see this. We just need to be clear what that bias is. And then I'm going to take, every single one of those lenses, biased or unbiased, and say, look, if I look through each one of these lenses, and some of them are darker than others, I might be able to see kind of the outline, the shape of what is actually happening in the market, what impact we are actually having when we conduct these broad-based marketing campaigns in this environment. So that was our approach, and a whole bunch of like finger crossing, which is this only works if we see clues all pointing in the same direction. If we see all of these different lenses kind of, and with different biases all pointing in different directions, then I have to go back to Chris and say, I don't know, like there's too much noise in the environment. I can't confidently say how, but I think if all these things point in the same direction, I think I can give you something with some confidence. So I know my team hoped that we would see things start to take shape, looking at it not in a perfect way, but rather in a really imperfect way, but looking across a landscape of different inputs. So I'm going to give you 4 examples here of the types of things that we looked at, and this is not exclusive. And I also don't really, I don't want to go into a methodological kind of conversation, although I'm happy to with anyone at any point. But I just want to give you a sense of the kinds of things. When I say we were looking at imperfect elements, what we were using, and this is 4 among many. So we took some of our things that we look at regularly. Up in the upper left-hand corner, that's just the impact of recognizers versus non-recognizers. This is an imperfect way to measure ad effectiveness in a normal environment, and we know that, and we understand the bias behind it. But we still looked at it here and said, do we have lifts? Do our recognizers, give us higher scores than our non-recognizers on some of our core goal metrics, the things that this campaign was goaled on? Again, a perception-based brand campaign. We also then, I'm just going to go downwards for a second on controlling for usage. We also took that exact kind of same view, and we applied weighting by week to it. So we had, in this case, short time series, but since the start of the campaign, and we could see the variance in the data, and we said, okay, that variance is largely due to increased usage week over week, and so we controlled for that. We waited for that every single week to start to pull out what was actually happening perceptually. So if you flatten out usage, category usage, which we don't typically need to do, what does that do and what do we see? We also, in the upper right-hand corner, just took a straight look at industry trends and how we differed from the industry to start to see, like, to start to tease apart. And this is just a straight linear regression, like nothing fancy here, except does it give me a clue that we are outperforming the category? If we're outperforming the category, maybe that's a clue that marketing is having something to do with that, because we are, the category in some ways acts as a imperfect control. And the last thing I'll just point out here was, for the researchers on the call, as I mentioned on the last slide, when we do these, really sophisticated models around trying to understand the impacts of marketing over time on sales. In this case, we didn't have that. So what we did was we took a structural equation model, which I typically don't use in this sense. I use it in a lot of other senses, and say, if we use recognition as a variable in that, what does it actually impact in the model? So instead of having a model based on long time series that suggests and starts to point to causality, although it's still not causal, here we said, all right, what can we see that points directionally to directional impacts that we can see go one way versus the other? So for examples, there's many more examples of what we as a team looked at. These are four of a handful more examples that we took in when we had the conversation with Chris, and it was super successful, which I'll get to in just a second. But I think the key learning for me, and as a leader of the team and as a leader in the industry really, is sometimes the preponderance of evidence can be more impactful than anything else, particularly when you're looking through lots of dark lenses and you're trying to see kind of the image behind the lens and it's just not clear. Like when you have the luxury of being able to triangulate, and triangulate isn't even, use 8 inputs or 10 inputs or 12 inputs, not that they are perfect, but rather that they start to paint a similar picture. That's where the moments of influence, I think, really come, particularly in this period where nothing really makes sense. And we are in some ways kind of using our best judgment as researchers, as analysts, as consultants to kind of take that moment of influence. So just 3 learnings I'll share. One, for us, it was about getting scrappy and being agile together as a team. Like this was a team effort at Microsoft, and it was also a team effort across our partners. We were really clear from the get-go that it's not about perfection. It's about understanding what we have and how can we twist it and turn it in a way that we feel confidently about as researchers, but that might be different than the way we would have used it before. Patterns become the source of confidence, because, like the one model or confidence in one statistical model no longer is enough. It really is about the sources, the patterns across the sources that become the confidence. And the other thing here that I'll note is it was really important that we just lay that bare with our CMO. And so I said to him, and we said to him as a team, I don't have the perfect answer, Chris, but what I do have is a lot of evidence that gives me confidence that this marketing is working and is having that impact. We should keep doing it. And it was super effective. It was a different kind of conversation than we often have, which is to say, I can't give you a degree of confidence, but I can tell you, we can tell you we've done our due diligence and this is based on a lot of things what we believe. So I'll leave it there. But happy to answer any questions or talk about any of this in more specificity.
That's terrific, Marian. I just so appreciate having this real world example. We're not talking theoretically anymore. We're not saying you could have done this, you should have done this. It's what you actually did. I was already smiling back at finger crossing. How often do we say we cross our fingers and our toes, but you had to get out there and put something together. I'm sure there's a lot of questions here from the research side or from our strategists, our marketers that have to deal with this information, but one thing I want to bring up is just what an intense human side there must have been to this situation. And your team was dealing in the unknown. And you're saying you're speaking directly to the CMO about real world issues that you had to make movements on. And if you just have one comment to share about what it meant for you at that point in your career to not rely on all of the things that you were used to and you had to do something different. If you just want to give an observation on that, I'd be interested to hear it.
I think that actually it was, I think the team had a hard time. It was a moment for the team where having to say, look, the perfect is the enemy in a way here, because we will never answer the question. We will never get to our moment of influence. We will never say what we think is happening if we rely on that. And it was actually a pretty uncomfortable place for us as a team who really rely on rigor. We rely on rigor across lots of things to say, we are here because we do this well. In this case, we were saying, we were taking a different pivot, which is we are here because we can be creative and figure out how to do this well. And it was, for me personally, it was super empowering. That's actually the reason I get up and kind of come to work as a researcher every day, is to be able to be creative and think about how can we use this data differently. So for me, it was super energizing. It was super scary to sit with Chris and say, not scary like he's a nice guy, but it was a moment where us as a team had to have confidence in truly our consulting ability, right? The research was not the thing we could rely on. And so I think as a team, we are better because of the moment it gave us to say, okay, there are different ways to do this. There's different ways to consult with this data. And I think next time, even when we have the perfect data, we will approach the story differently, which is really exciting.
Terrific. I have a couple of questions in the chat, but I want to open it up if anyone wants to ask a live question or make an observation from your own work, your own businesses. One always gets shy in these. Okay, so one of the questions is, actually, I'll ask you two hand in hand. How receptive was your leadership that this data was not perfect or reliable? We'll start there. And then there's another question on if you did come to find that one of the sources of data tended to kind of rise up to have more accuracy between machine learning, the secondary and the primary. So I'm throwing a lot at you, but interested to hear.
So leadership is receptive. I think your Satya quote at the beginning was maybe a helpful context setting for kind of where we are. Very receptive. And also it's a different way for us to operate. So it's a little uncomfortable for everybody. And, you know, we doubled down on this campaign after that conversation. So not only receptive, but influenced real decisions. What was the second part of the question, Jen?
So the next question is about, because you were dealing with a lot of different sources that you were pooling together, and it was trying to look across them. I think we have a bit of a horse race here. Somebody in the crowd is trying to find out, did you find that one had even a bit more accuracy when you consider machine learning, secondary data, or primary data? Did one kind of be a lead horse?
Well, no. Every single source we had bias in this case. There was not a source. This was the challenge, actually. I didn't know which source I could have more confidence in. I could see bias in every single one of them. And so we really were relying on the all arrows, fingers crossed, pointing in a similar direction in order to give us that confidence. Typically speaking, yes, I could give you lots of thoughts on, you know, machine learning versus, you know, relying on other techniques. Like I do think that there are areas where machine learning really plays a strong role in how we understand the impacts. In this case, though, that was part of the challenges. I and my team as researchers really weren't sure where the confidence was, because we could see the bias, we could see the change in usage, we could see the people leaned into the category in a new way. Like, all of it was unclear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Anybody want to raise an additional question?
There's another one in the chat, Jen, that's, can you elaborate on how you will approach the story differently in the future? So I think that's what you said. And can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, we're doing it again October 1st. So we're actively working on the next revision of the story. We're also doing things like think through the role, so of product marketing versus brand, true brand, high level, like Microsoft brand marketing right now. And so how I would do it differently next time. Honestly, I think that the thing that gives me the most pause is the pressure it put on my team. So it was, Jen, back to your comment earlier, I don't know how I would do the analysis differently. The amount of pressure it put on the team in a very short period of time, we basically went from 0 to recommendation to the CMO in 2.5 weeks. And it was really, really stressful. So setting aside my researcher hat and thinking about my leader hat, I don't feel great about that. And honestly, I'm still struggling with that in this new world of how do we step back and stop being so reactionary and start being I'm not sure it's not reactionary, more planful about needing to be reactionary in a way. Like, so that's the part where I would do the same analyses again. We've since put different kinds of data into the field to try and give us a little clearer sense on this particular thing, but I feel really proud of what we did and the story we told. I feel really uneasy about the team, the stress it put on the team. I think that would be the place I would do differently again. Not sure how I would do it differently, but it was not something that I think is a healthy dynamic.
Yeah, and it's a thought felt around the world, isn't it? Maybe, I mean, that is the one time machine learning could really help us humans out, right? Let us get some rest.
Yeah.
This has just been a fantastic share, Marian. Thank you for the willingness to be able to open up what you did as a leader when you have a very aggressive competitive set, wanting to know every step you're taking. I think you took the right balance here. I've got to commend you guys. Marian just gave a Microsoft presentation on a Zoom platform. So if that's a collaborative, willing partner to go with the flow, because we didn't pivot fast enough to invite you all on Teams, which we use at Heart+Mind. Thank you so much for that, Marian. I know this has just been such a great session for everybody, and we will keep you in the loop with some of the questions that to continue to develop in the chat. I wanted to give a minute or two over to Dee before we wrap up and kind of close this out.
Marian, first of all, good to see you, and thanks so much for sharing, how Microsoft is managing some of its marketing and communications decisions. I think that case that you shared is just really remarkable. Thank you so much. As most of you know, we usually try to bring clients in and to tell the story of how they're managing situations and different sectors. And Marian is a good example of what we've been trying to do. 2 weeks from now in our roundtable is going to be very different. The elections are playing a kind of a different role. And 2 weeks from now, we're going to bring in leading political, on-the-ground, real consultants from the left and from the right, Jay Toscano on the left and Bill McInturf on the right, who are going to come in and kind of give us the perspective of what's going on in the elections to help us to kind of see how we manage that. A lot of companies are kind of waiting on seeing what they're going to do until they know what the outcome is. And there's a lot riding on these elections, I think sometimes a lot more than in the past. So while these have not had a political focus, we are going to have a political focus in 2 weeks from today, bringing in a very top leading consultant from the left and one from the right to kind of tell us in their view what they see, to help you kind of make decisions as companies in terms of the uncertainties that are approaching as the election comes. And we look forward to having you all joining us 2 weeks from now.
Thanks everybody for making us a part of your busy week back after Labor Day. And again, Christy, Aaron, and Marian, thank you for the great content and the great thought.
Great job, everyone. Thank you, Marian.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.